Hello and welcome to this session. We have with us Andrew Hill, who is the management editor of the Financial Times. He's an author of 2 bestseller books. He's also won several awards for his lovely journalism over the last many decades. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Andrew, you've been writing a lot about the opportunity to reboot the workplace. And there are certain angles about work from home and digitalization, which are appealing in many contexts to large multinationals. But there is also this whole feeling about the physicality of supply chains, the physicality about several workplaces or geographies across the world, let's say Africa, or even let's say parts of India, where it is not always possible for people to be completely working remotely. What is your view from a holistic perspective, on this whole business of rebooting, the workplace?
Well, I think a lot of what we're writing, if you like, from London or New York or Tokyo for that matter, tends to think of the workplace as being an office space or a factory. And it's very easy to find that we've ignored the wider network of work that supplies that center. Multinational corporations that are based in developed countries and big established capital cities and so on work with and rely on a wider supply chain. And I think a lot of them in the context of the pandemic have had to make a sort of shift in thinking, really, because they've realized that a number of the people that work directly for them and many, many more that supply them are working in different conditions. And so it's very easy, and I put my hand up to this myself, that it's very easy to ignore or forget that there is a wider diaspora of work going on that can't necessarily be done digitally. It may be because the tools aren't there. The people who are supplying are small businesses based in locations that don't have access to that infrastructure. And so I think part of what I think about as the rebooting of the workplace is a rebooting of that network, because I think what the pandemic has done for a lot of companies is to make them realize how dependent they are on the interconnectedness of other workspaces and other workers. And they've had to either supply the kit to help them to work in new ways, or they're having to rethink how they support that wider network.
Very interesting. The war for talent is a phrase that has often been used, again, across geographies and largely for multinationals across the globe. For a very long time, the larger organizations, because of their ability to provide fantastic physical campuses, freebies, great perks at the workplace, and large HR teams, employee engagement teams, were able to attract talent and become employers of choice. The whole business of working from home, to a certain extent, is putting them on a level playing field with somebody 100th or 1000th their size. Because if someone has to work from home, it doesn't really matter whether he's coding for Google or coding for the next upstart. And how do you think that is sort of going to play out going forward?
Well, I think, obviously that's been written about and commented on in the UK and elsewhere as a threat, in part, to workers in those countries. Because if we abolish the idea that you need to come into work, and therefore you abolish some bad things like presenteeism, I've got to be in the office to be seen by my manager, and you move to a, I think, positive situation where you're assessing outcomes and output rather than just are you there or are you not there.
Sure.
That positive side could be offset by for the worker in those countries, by the possibility that you can then choose to outsource that work to anybody anywhere in the world, provided they can produce the same output. And that was always a threat pre-pandemic, but it may have become more real to them. But as you say, there's also an opportunity there for those smaller businesses that can say, look, if I can do as well as the multinationals can with infrastructure, the laptop, the camera, the broadband link paid for by the company, then I no longer need to be dealing with all the costly overhead of running a big air-conditioned headquarters. I think it works in a different way in favor of the multinationals, though, because I think a lot of those big companies, and I was talking to Nick Bloom of Stanford University, who's done a lot of the research about remote work before the pandemic, and he said to me, he thinks one of the advantages, one of the reasons why some of the bigger companies have probably outperformed in the early part of this crisis is because actually they have the much maligned HR function, the human resources, personnel, people managers, whatever we now call them. But if you've got 200 people managers who you can use not only to supply the infrastructure and help people make sure they've got the laptops to work remotely, but perhaps more importantly, to support the staff as they're going through the stresses of having to work out of the office, then actually you have a bit of an advantage over that small company that you mentioned. Now, there's a different war for talent there that might be played out in the coming years, because clearly, if you're a warm and compassionate employer, whatever your size, that may turn out to be, that warmth and compassion may turn out to be, as you suggest, more important than the fact that you have a glossy office into which everybody can go. Now, clearly, in some parts of the world, including India, and I heard this early in the crisis from some big companies that I spoke to, pointing out that they had to grapple with the fact not only that their workers in India and other countries didn't have the kit at home to be able to work remotely, they also recognized that a lot of those workers did not have a home environment in which they ever wanted to work. And that's to some degree been the case in Britain and America and other countries with younger workers working out of small apartments. But clearly, in a lot of cases, the big attraction of a Goldman Sachs in Bangalore or an Infosys or a big company with a big campus was that they could provide all that shelter, if you like, for people commuting in from less ideal workplaces, let's say.
Very true. So, given that situation, Andrew, what do you think is the sort of the possible futures of management, if you will? You know, given that so much of it is going to be remote, and not so much about being present or absent, not about the quantity, more in terms of the outcome. How do you think some of the key principles of management within large organizations will change?
Well, I've just been writing an article about this, actually, and I think that there are, if you'll allow it, four C's to this. There's a need for leaders to be for clarity, to provide clarity to their workforce. Clearly, a lot of the things that we do when we're physically gathered together they may even be as little as a glance, and you infer something from your boss by working closely with them that you might not be able to get via video link, if you even have that link. So clarity of communication is important. I think encouraging connectedness, not just digitally, but making sure that the right people are working together. I heard last week about a company that, for example, had deliberately set up a number of mini projects that brought together people from different parts of the company, almost as a way of encouraging them to communicate and connect with each other. That obviously leads to collaboration, kind of third C, which I think is vital, where you end up with, I think, leaders often stepping back and saying, we're going to put you together and you need to work on this. So a lot more autonomy to workers. And then the fourth one is the one I've sort of mentioned in answer to your previous question, which is compassion. The need, when you know that people are in awkward circumstances, not to mention during the crisis that they're also potentially under all sorts of mental pressure because of the state of the world, the need for leaders to be sort of compassionate. And what I see here is in a strange way, these are all things that leaders should have been doing before the pandemic. And you kind of question, well, why are we having to emphasize this now? Those are the sort of keys to good leadership. But I think what COVID-19 has done, and lockdowns of various sorts, is to bring those to the fore. And those will be the elements that people really want to, leaders will really need to emphasize during the coming months.
Right. When we talk about compassion and the ability of large organizations with, let's say, people in the HR function, and the ability to sort of deploy them for the overall good of the employee workforce. On one hand, you've got the convergence of work and life, right? Which also means that your mental health and well-being, your mental fitness, if you will, is no longer only your responsibility then, right? And do you see large organizations stepping up to that by taking care of employees' sort of mental fitness, wellness programs, so on and so forth?
Well, we saw quite a lot of that. I thought it was a pleasant surprise to me that one of the first things that people talked about early in the crisis, when I spoke to big companies, was, we're rolling out mental health support, well-being apps, employee assistance programs, and all of them should have had that already. And once again, to the same point about leadership, this has made people suddenly acutely aware of that. I think there are two concerns there. One is those smaller enterprises that you mentioned may not have as sophisticated a setup, let alone the people to be able to implement it. Of course, if you're smaller, you can be more aware of what your colleagues are, how they're feeling and what they're doing. So that's a concern. I mean, I think another concern clearly is that a lot of people aren't covered by the umbrella of large companies. And so, the mental health of an independent worker, a gig worker, a freelancer, a self-employed person is really down to them. And it's also down to the structures that are either already in place or that the wider community and government can put in place. I mean, one positive, and I'm not sure how much this is being implemented across the board, is that companies and leaders have become aware, as you suggest, that their employees are, they have families, they have communities, and you see them literally in the background of the Zoom calls and so on. And so I think extending that support for well-being to the wider group, which itself supports the employee, is rather important. And I'd like to see lots more companies doing that and making explicit that some of the tools that they're offering for the individual employee are also available to the people that are important to that employee. I'm not sure how widespread that is.
Sure. No, and it makes a lot of sense because, work has gone home, so which means, the home is coming to the workplace in some sense as well. And along with it, the family and, partners, etc. Thank you so much, Andrew. We've come to the end of the session, and I think some great insights from you. And good luck with your future sort of books that you're going to write, I'm sure.
Thank you, and to you.